Dear colleagues, dear Sue, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to our Asian colleagues. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone and introduce this webinar. We will be celebrating and reminding everyone on the United Nations Environmental Day. Since we embarked onto our environmental journey at UCB back in 2016, a lot has been achieved so far, and this is also the opportunity for the team to be thanks for all the contributions day by day, either through your individual actions as a team, as green teams or ambassadors, or as leader at UCB, integrating the environmental considerations as a sustainable practice into your daily life. UCB's tagline is inspired by patients driven by science. This goes so well with us at UCB. When we developed our environmental strategy, this was aligned with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement recommendations to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius at that time. We will be carbon neutral by 2030. We will reduce our water consumptions by 20%. We will further limit our waste generations on the activities we control directly. I mean the emissions due to energy consumptions of fuel, gas, electricity at UCB sites and offices, due to our car fleet, our business travel, our day-to-day commuting, due to the distribution of our products around the world. So this is going to be a solid journey forward. This year, our CO2 target has been validated and officially recognized by the Science Based Targets initiative, an established and respected partnership between the Carbon Disclosure Projects, the United Nations Global Compact, World Resources Institute, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature. We are committed to reduce our CO2 emissions by 30% by 2030. This versus our 2015 baseline, whatever the growth of the company will be. This is an absolute target. To remain coherent, we have also recently committed to expand our reach and influence at least 60% of the partners we are working with, to also engage on science-based target-like objectives. And this is in that context that I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Sue Garrett. Sue is one of the world's leading expert practitioners in developing sustainability strategies in major companies and aligning them with business objectives. She runs her own consultancy business. Her clients include Mars, Primark, O2, RBS, Jersey Telecom, and Danone. She's an independent advisor on sustainability strategy, working with major businesses that are seeking to step up on their sustainability ambitions and performance. Until autumn 2018, she was Executive Vice President, Sustainable Business and Communications at Unilever, where she was responsible for leading and embedding the company's ambitious sustainable living plan into the business and ensuring delivery against its 70+ time-bound target. In particular, she was responsible for establishing sustainability as a driver of brand growth. By the end of 2018, Unilever's sustainable living brands were growing 67% faster than its other brands and represented 70% of the company's growth. Prior to Unilever, Sue was Director General of the Department of Work and Pensions, where she led customer strategy and communication through the global recessions. She is a founder of Blueprint for Better Business and remains a trustee, a fellow of the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, a visiting fellow at Cransfield Foods for Business Management, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. You are also advising a range of sustainability-related startup projects on a pro bono basis. Sue, we are really proud to have you with us today to speak about our next level ambitions, how to effectively engage and influence our business partners towards reducing their environmental footprint. To our colleagues, do not hesitate to post your questions via the chat. There will be a Q&A session at the end. Sue, the floor is yours.
That's wonderful. Can I first check that you can all hear me and the technology is working so far? Yes, I
Wonderful.
do confirm that we hear you loud and clear.
That's fantastic. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your special day, and congratulations on the progress you've made so far and the journey that you've just heard painted for you that the organisation is going to go on. And it's fair to say that it's a journey that probably most organisations 10 years ago couldn't dream that they were going to take. So in the world of our corporate lives now, no matter what sector you're in, this is hitting us like an express train. And we know that big established businesses find it very, very hard to deal with things that rush at you like an express train. And what's clear is that you are building your ambition more and more and doing exactly what the world's needed, which is, as you start to understand how you can address your own internal issues, you're now looking more widely to see how you can have a bigger positive impact. And it's very much in that context that I want to paint a picture for you about what I've learned about how to do that, focusing particularly on what I learned at Unilever, but more. I picked this title, Follow the Science, for a number of reasons. Obviously, because this has become the mantra worldwide as we deal with the pandemic. So it's very current in that specific context. More broadly, because it's absolutely essential to sit at the heart of how you tackle the environmental side of your sustainability challenges. And we just heard indeed that that's what you're doing with science-based targets, which is great. But the third reason that I picked it is because of this particular individual. I just left clicked there, Cedric, and there's been no action. So as I was saying, the other reason that I picked this phrase is because hopefully you all know that this is Greta Thunberg, and that she's obviously 18 years old now, but at the age of 15, she started to have more impact to force organisations to change. And let's be honest, most organisations need to be forced. This isn't a soft voluntary action. And she alone is starting to catalyse a lot of the changes that we need to see. And she's done it in a very deceptively simple but powerful way. And I think there's a huge amount to learn from Greta. So really, the other thing I wanted to say very early on is, if any of us feel at the individual or the corporate level that what we're doing in the overall scheme of things is insignificant, just think that one 15-year-old girl, through her passion and her focus and her belief and her obstinacy, has had more impact on governments and companies worldwide than Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth and every other lobbyist has had for 25 years. That in its own is a remarkable fact that I think I personally hugely celebrate. But what is also significant, that was marvellous, my slide moved on the first click. What's magnificent is that both the message, what she says, but also the messenger, who she is and who she represents, really matter. So let me just unpack that for you very briefly. First of all, to the left-hand side here, this is a picture literally taken from one of the global protests that happened all around the world. And what Greta has done has never been done before, and I think is a building block for the future. She has ignited what we call Gen Z, young people, and they are increasingly caring about these issues, and that's critical for businesses, any sort of business, whether you're customer facing or business facing, because this is shifting the priorities of businesses, because their consumers are changing their buying patterns, not just their attitudes. And this is a seismic change in markets all around the world. And just think for a moment, who would have thought just 10 years ago that one 15-year-old girl could marry up with the technology that's now available on the internet, to have 6 million people all around the world in multiple countries all going on strike for the same issue on the same day. Just think about that power. Absolutely enormous. And this is just the start. And the reason that this is important is not just to pay respect to what Greta has done. It's crucially because she is driving the way that markets change, and that matters to every business that has a shareholder, including you. And she's doing it, to go to the slide, the picture on the right, in a very deceptively simple way. And she's put under pressure all the time to give people advice on how we should make these changes. And she's very clever because she doesn't get drawn into that trap. Instead of what she does all the time, very consistently, is she simply invites everybody to follow the science. And what that really means is that what we all need to do in our private lives and in our corporate lives is to set ourselves objectives that deliver what needs to be done, not just what it's convenient to do now. And that is the most critical thing that following the science does, is it anchors you in doing what's needed. And what I've got a picture of here, just to bring it to life a little bit, is one of my favourite ways of depicting one of those major challenges, which is the reduction in CO2. And this simply shows you the pathway, and it shows you that actually by 2040, we need to have a significant amount of activity that is producing net negative emissions. So if you follow the science, that's the scale of the challenge facing all of us. And so that's a very crucial part of how we set about when I was at Unilever, establishing what we needed to do. But there was something missing. And this is true, whatever business you're in. And of course, what's missing is what the business case is. And what I see all the time with organisations that are raising their level of ambition, one of the most common areas where they go wrong is when they actually lose sight of the business case. And it's very easy when the moral case becomes overwhelming. We can see the case for change at the moral level. But actually, if you're going to make this the right thing for the business for the long term, it's critical to also think about the business case. And most organisations I find still find it quite hard to articulate the business case. So this may look very simple, but Unilever used this structure. We created this structure. We then reversed it into the whole of the way that we managed the business, and that made it a very powerful single-minded tool. But very simply, what we asked ourselves as we built out our sustainability plans were, could it do one of these four things? Could sustainability activity drive more growth, build more trust, lower our costs, or reduce the amount of risk that we faced? And if it couldn't, why were we doing it? So it's a deceptively, again, powerful but simple tool that complemented my point about the science. So just to unpack this a little bit, when you ask yourself about the business case, what you find is that it triggers the sorts of questions that I have here on the left-hand side of the slide. So if you think about growth, which, by the way, very few people do early on in their sustainability journey. And it's interesting, in your introduction, I didn't hear any language around growth, and that's very common. It's seen much more as risk mitigation, I think, still traditionally. But open with the question, do you know what your customers and your consumers want? And I'm going to come back to that question because I think it's a critical one. And of course, we see regulation growing all around the world, and understanding what penalties you might face is an absolutely fundamental one, because it's very easy to ignore just how much that's going to escalate. If you're a listed company, the way your investors are looking now is going to be changing very quickly, and they're going to be assessing whether or not you are a growing risk in their investment portfolio. That's a very fast moving trend at the moment. Then for big businesses, you employ thousands of people, and we see a very strong trend at the moment around how people feel about their relationship with work. Again, COVID, I think, has changed this quite dramatically, and understanding what makes somewhere an attractive place to work is really central to this. And then there's the whole question of the license to operate. So that's just a few of the questions that organisations need to be asking themselves. And I would encourage each of you, not just on this call, although obviously on this call, but on a regular basis, to keep asking those questions and going, are you clear on the answers? Because if you're not, then what you're not clear about is the business case for what your sustainability changes are. And if you're not clear on the business case, then when you come to tension points, as all businesses do, around priorities and investment and so on and so forth, then you will find that your plans will come into question. And you will also find that it's hard for people to follow what needs to be done because they're not clear on the rationale. So this may look very simplistic, but it's actually one of the most important challenges, is my advice to you to try and meet as you go forward on your very long, very critical journey around sustainability. So what we found at Unilever was that when we married the sustainability growth, cost, risk, trust wheel, the business case wheel, with the science, that really flushed out most of the key elements that we needed to resolve across the strategy. And in all my work with my other clients, exactly the same thing has been true. And if you start from the point of view that sustainability is an enormous area, and what you need to do is get a handle on what matters, this is a very, very simple, powerful tool for doing it. So immediately when you look at the science, it helps you understand where your priorities lie. What does the world need us to do, and what contribution are you making to the problem at the moment is another way of thinking about it. This next one is critical in the context of the introduction that we all heard, as you think about widening your reach to activity from through partners, because scope is really fundamental. And what you find in almost any major organisation is that the scope within your own operations, what's often called scope 1 and 2 technically, that scope is a very small fraction of your total impact, whether it's carbon, whether it's waste, whether it's pollution, whether it's consumption of raw materials, almost always. Getting your own house in order is a great first step, but it's a tiny contribution to the problem that is created by the existence of your whole organisation. The third thing it does is it helps you set your level of ambition. Oh, I can see Anne-Laure is waving at me, which means probably she's going to throw me my first challenge.
Exactly. Thank you, Sue, for stopping for a while. We have two questions that I think can be interesting from what you just mentioned before. The first one is, how do you cope with the paradigm of selling more product and having a growth in your market share and being conscious that you tap into a limited number of resources from the planet?
Yes.
So that's the first question. And the second one, which is a bit related, is to say at UCB, we don't really have consumers. We have patients.
Sure.
With really switching to another drugs, it's long and it's risky for them. So is the power of the patient or consumer, if we can say for UCB, the same or can be compared with other type of business?
Sure. Okay. So shall I tackle those now then?
If you can, that would be great.
Yep.
Or if it's already part of your speech, then we can wait.
Well, I may repeat the odd point, but I think it's probably good to tackle those directly. So on the first one, you know, there's a big question out there, which is, do we have to stop growth? Now, certainly until we have a different system other than the capital markets, that's going to be a disaster for everything from pension funds upwards. So at the moment, I don't think we have a market mechanism that can accommodate it. More profoundly, I think stopping any form of growth now freezes the level of, if it were possible, which it's not, by the way, but I understand it's a philosophical question, would freeze the world at the current level of equality or inequality that we have now. And we all know that inequality is one of the most fundamental global problems. You only have to look at the problems of COVID vaccination for countries that are less wealthy and less well developed. Even in a world where we all know that, to use the mantra, nobody is safe until we're all safe from COVID. We still see very vividly the problem of inequality. So that's crucial, because what we need is the right kind of growth. And in the absence of any master strategist pulling the strings on companies across the globe to achieve that, what you need to look to in your own organisation is that you deliver growth in a way that basically decouples your growth from your environmental impact. Okay, so that's where your strategy is critical, where you need to look at the things I've listed here. What are the priorities? Where are your most material issues? Where in your full value chain, not just your own operation, do those affect? To exactly the point in the question about consuming raw materials. How does that drive you to a strategy that really does decouple, which will almost certainly include major shifts around energy and electricity consumption? It will probably include a shift to a circular business model. By the way, that's a 15-year journey. So these are big long-term business model shifts. And where, in effect, what you're doing is almost entirely eliminating waste from your entire value chain of your business model, because any resources that are finite need to stop being used in a linear way, take, make, use, dispose, and need to start literally going around in a closed loop. And that may mean that you need to change some of the materials that you use. It may mean that you need to change some of the delivery mechanisms that you use. It may mean that you need to change some of the elements of the way in which you have patient interventions at the most basic level. So it is a deep, profound business model shift. And that's why in this list, I talk about the level of ambition, which has to be set by that. You have to consider growth in the context of decoupling. Anything less is not adequate, and eventually we will get regulated out of our ability to behave like that. But the sooner you start doing it, the better you get at it, and therefore the more competitive you are. And of course, what the world needs is, it doesn't need companies like you to stop doing stuff or to scale back your activity. It needs you to be more successful than any less responsible competitor that's having a bigger negative impact. And that's how you get to the old concept that John Elkington introduced 40 years ago, the triple bottom line, where something is good economically, good socially, and good environmentally. Okay, and that's why, to the fourth bullet point on this slide, the time frame that you set for achieving this sort of change is very important, because we're not talking here about small iterative changes. We're talking here about the need for a step change that drives a different business model and probably changes the solutions to which are not all evident now. And in order to do that, you need to give yourself both the high level of ambition, but the time to learn, for external things to change, for competitors to change, and for you to iterate and drive big shifts over a medium-term period, usually at least 10 years. So that's both an amplification of this slide, and I hope starts to give an answer to that first question. Can you just repeat the second question for me, Anne?
Sure. The question was, our business is a bit different. We are working on drugs for patients, so can this be still applied, like the power of the consumer driving the change, can this be applied to the pharma industry?
Yes. So the short answer is yes, it can. The slightly longer answer, to be more helpful to the person who asked the question, I'm actually going to come and unpack that in just a minute. And if you think I need to say any more about it at that point, just interrupt me again. Okay, I'm going to see if my slide moving capability, hurrah. Okay, so when Anne invited me to talk to you today, one of the things she said is that I shouldn't assume that people know very much about Unilever. And of course, as your previous questioner was implying, Unilever is a very different business. It's directly consumer facing. It has 400 brands. It's existed for 130 years. It operates in 180 markets. And the complexity, therefore, of taking that kind of legacy business at that scale and improving its sustainability was just enormous. But what we learnt from that does directly apply, and I'll show you how, to pretty much any sector. And indeed, I've found since I've been working as a consultant that it doesn't matter whether you are an investment bank, whether you're selling a digital media, whether you're making baby food, or doing anything, by the way, that is not a direct consumer-facing business. All the basic principles that were true to what drove our success at Unilever apply almost universally. So I'm just going to give you a brief snapshot of those and directly answer this customer-consumer question versus patients, okay? So very briefly, what the plan was. Now, again, think about this. This was developed in 2009-10 and launched in 2011. That's over 10 years ago. It's very difficult now to think back to how immature the sustainability questions that we're discussing today were all that time ago. But what we said was we wanted to set 3 big goals. So if you look at that central part of the slide there, what we were trying to do, first of all, was to say that our core business had to serve a direct social purpose. And so we wanted to be able to prove quantitatively that our brands were improving the health and well-being of over 1 billion people in 10 years, 1 billion people. So we were looking for scale of impact of the direct business. We were also saying that we wanted to decouple our growth from our environmental impact, and that's what the middle target there in the green says. So we were trying to halve the environmental impact of the organisation. And if you think about what was agreed at Paris and what the IPCC have said since, that continues to be the advice, that halving environmental impact, particularly in carbon, is a kind of a critical starting point. And then thirdly, and I think again this plays directly into what was said at the point of the introduction, is that we wanted to try and use our scale as a force for good in our wider partnerships, and in particular in our supply chain. And that's a really critical point. And so we said we reckon we affect 10 to 15 million people's livelihoods indirectly. They're completely outside our direct control, but we believe we can have an influence. And so what we said was, okay, those are very big ambitions. Let's give ourselves the time to learn. So it was 10 years. BHAG, my next bullet point under key features, that stands for a big, hairy, audacious goal. We said the scale of the change the world needs is too big for us to build it from the bottom up based on just what we know in the company. We actually need to stretch ourselves and be slightly scared about the scale of our ambition in a few areas. As you can see, there were just 3, because we believe that that will drive a much more ambitious shift within the company. And it doesn't actually matter if we hit 100% of those targets. What matters is the scale of the shift that you achieve through doing that in a way you don't do when you design incremental targets. Crucially, to my point previously about scope, we looked at the full value chain and we found that most of our footprint was upstream or downstream in the use of our brands or the making of our brands, and that getting our own house in order, again, was a nice thing to do, but it was really just a hygiene factor. We made sure that we tackled all forms, most material forms of finite resource use, which were energy, water and waste. And in its moment, having a measurable positive impact upstream in the supply chain was a completely radical thing to do. And then we had 70 targets that sat below those that defined what it was that we were really trying to achieve, and crucially, whether we were going to make any progress. So,
Sue,
yeah.
Can I interrupt you again? I have 2 questions that relate to what type of triggers company have for this type of commitment. So the first one is, what do you see as a trend going in the various board and executive committee of major companies in the world? And are they following up because of business case that you mentioned, or because they follow others? And the second question that is as well related to that is to say, we see society pushing companies to act on this topic. So either by Kurt, Shell or activists, and ExxonMobil for the last 2 weeks, or in Danone, for example, the CEO was fired because of lack of financial results, despite great effort on sustainability. So how do you interpret these kind of contradictory messages?
So on the contradictory messages point, the two examples that you've just given really illustrate very strongly that unless this is integrated into the wider business plan, if there's a contest between which is more important, the business plan or the sustainability plan, you're leaving it to your employees to work out which is more important. And if the leadership don't know, well, that's not a very good statement of leadership, but it also creates confusion within the business. In the case of Danone, what you see is that confusion led to people following the passion of the CEO, and the passion of the CEO was around sustainability. And when you talk to people within the business, and I know some because I did some work with their waters division a couple of years ago for a year or so, is that actually the internal glue between sustainability and the business case was not there. And so either you simply decide that sustainability is not something that matters to you and the company. Is it right people should have that choice? I don't think so. And so you pursue that passion, or you say, yes, that's very interesting. That's the CEO's passion, but I've got my business targets here and that's what I'm going to focus on. So that question, thank you, whoever asked it, is a great one because it actually really makes concrete and tangible what a risk it is if the leadership of the organisation can't explain why this is not just the right thing to do, which is what I call the moral case, but it's also the necessary thing to do as part of the company's being fit for the future. Because that ultimately everybody wants to work for a successful organisation and everybody needs the clarity about how all the challenges that a business face fits together and what their role is in delivering it. And if you can't articulate it as a leader, how can anybody follow it? So that's my answer to the second question. And it leads directly into my answer to the first, which is that there are all sorts of different catalysts for why companies are taking this seriously now. But when you boil it down and simplify it, I would say it's one of two or three things. The first is that you have a visionary leader who sees the world in a different way and who has the courage to say, I can lead an organisation at scale in a way that can both deliver the short-term needs of shareholders and can also deliver the long-term needs of wider stakeholders, including ultimately our ability to operate on the planet without robbing it from tomorrow. So visionary leaders are one critical ingredient. There are very few of them. And so the much more common thing that you see is that consumers are walking away from them. And this is really starting to happen. It started as a trickle. In some sectors, it's a flood. So either consumers are putting pressure on them, and that's about brand loyalty and sales, or activists are putting pressure on them. You talked about Exxon. That's a great, very current example. Or very new investors are putting pressure on them. And what happens is that more and more, actually, it's not just one of those sources that's putting pressure on. So in the old days, again, really until 10 to 15 years ago, the finance director could manage the investor community, and the corporate affairs people could manage the NGOs and the activists, and the salespeople would manage the consumers, and they were all completely separate. What's extraordinary and very different about today's operating environment is all three of those can not only see what each other's points of view are much more easily, but they actually have the same desire for shift. So in the old days, the NGO wanted you to stop everything, the investor wanted you to grow anything. Not anymore. Now, for the first time ever, we see complete alignment in a lot of cases between the different stakeholder pressure groups, and that's very powerful. So that's driving a very significant degree of very rapid re-evaluation by companies. And of course, they're saying, boy, and we now feel under intense pressure to change, and we don't know how to do it. And so we're seeing now a very rapid moving level of change, not yet fully backed by a level of leadership competence, which is a very vulnerable position for a lot of companies to be in. So I hope that's done justice to those questions. So I shall keep going here. I just want to show you what happens when you do this well. So this is the world's most recognized survey of companies globally. And it looks at sustainability from a number of dimensions. This slide shows you how senior officials in government, investors, media commentators, either the community that judge company performance, how they regard and rank different companies on how well, this is very important, the question that they're answering. So it says here, what specific companies do you think are leaders in integrating sustainability into their business strategy? Not just doing sustainability, but integrating it into their business strategy. Now, what you can see here is that Unilever is not only at the top, but there's a massive margin between them, delta between them and any other organisation. It's interesting also when you look at that list that none of your sector is even on that list. So that raises all sorts of questions that we probably haven't got time to get into in much detail today. But the point is that that's after 12 years of learning how to do it, that we are seen at Unilever as having made this part of how we become a more successful business. And we've done it in a way, to that one of the earlier questions you asked me, Anne, in a way that decouples our growth, or will increasingly decouple growth from environmental impact, which is really crucial so that you get the right form and quality of growth. What Unilever have also done is got ahead of where the investor community are, because I talked about the degree of change and the questions investors are asking now. So Business is Green is just a UK publication online that it looks at the impact of all sorts of environmental issues on business and how they're responding. And this is just a report very recently, you can see the date of the 6th of May here, that talks about the fact that Unilever was the first company to go to its shareholder base and to say, this is what our action plan is for climate. These will be the positive impacts. Here are the costs. Do you support that, and will you put it to a vote? And a 99.6% support is phenomenal. And I think that's probably the most concrete evidence you can get of the speed and the nature of at which the investor community is moving in what it's looking for when it looks at a solid, low risk, well managed and forecast growth business. So, you know, these are not issues of moral nature. These are issues about business being fit for the future. Yeah. Critically, the thing that underpinned this, and this is the work that I led at Unilever, is, and I mentioned this before, that a lot of companies come last to the question of growth, when actually we all know that that's the thing that is in the company DNA of being successful, is growth. That's the signal of success. And we all want to work for something that's successful. So why do we psychologically miss out the whole area of growth in our initial conversations thinking about sustainability? And the work that we did really demonstrated that no matter what the sector, to your questioner's point of view, there is a very strong desire for organisations, people, consumers to have business relationships with and buy from businesses that are more responsible. So we injected sustainability into our biggest brands, and those, again, as you heard in the introduction, were the brands that started growing enormously faster. Now, for those of you that don't know very much about the consumer goods sector, and why should you in your sector, If you have a very mature stable of brands, you would expect to see growth from those brands of between 3 to 5% a year if they're being run, if that business is being run well. So 69 to 70% superior growth is simply off the scale. And that was purely about taking what we were doing within the business in the way our products were sourced, where our partners were sourcing from, back to the introduction point, and making them show up very visibly in the brands that people knew and loved. And what happened was they rewarded us with dramatically greater sales. So I want to talk about one example of that in very concrete terms, which is palm oil. So for Unilever, this was one of our single biggest ingredients. And I'm talking about this because of your point about how you widen the scope of what you do into your supply chain and to your partners. And we were the world's single biggest buyer of palm oil, but we only bought 5%. And palm oil is one of the biggest contributors to deforestation, which in itself causes 20% of global climate change. So it was a big problem, and we were a big part of that problem. But how on earth can you tackle something that's you feel is out of your control? And what the next slide does, don't try and read this, everybody. There's a lot. It is a detailed slide, not something I normally do. This is taken from the Unilever website. And this is a list, published list of all the mills from which Unilever sources its palm oil. So mills are basically where all the raw palm oil and palm oil kernels go in order to be milled to produce the oil at the end of that process. And this is just one page, by the way, of a screenshot of one page from the website. There are 4 or 5 pages of this level of detail. Now, the reason that I'm showing this to you is to start to get you to think in concrete terms about the challenge that we heard in the introduction, about shifting to having more of an impact on the supply chain. If you think very simply about when you put, most of you still, petrol or diesel in your cars, what you get is a digital display, isn't it? And the digital display says, this is how many litres you've bought and this is the price. So you imagine if there was a third digital display and what it said was, here are 79 different oil wells from all around the world, which contributed a fraction of the blended fuel that you have just put in your petrol pump. Mind-boggling complexity, absolutely extraordinary. That's the complexity of the supply chain challenge that we faced at Unilever in trying to address one of our most material and significant problems, which is that one of our main source ingredients in everything from our food to our face cream was causing deforestation and global warming. And so we set out a 10-year plan for how we could build enough collaboration with other big buyers of palm oil to start to define a more sustainable standard. What does that actually mean? To try and get some common agreement around that was workable in the field. And then to get the critical mass of buyers to say, we now don't want to buy the damaging palm oil, we want to buy the alternative, more sustainably sourced palm oil. And we set a target in 2011 that by 2020, we wanted to be able to prove transparently that all the palm oil that we bought and used was sourced sustainably. And we met the target a year early. And the way that we did that was by changing the way we thought about how we operated with our partners and suppliers, being focused only on the most significant material issues that were true to our business, but then getting involved at a level of detail that you'd never normally get involved in your supply chain, and partnering with key suppliers and partnering equally with people that are normally competitors, because they give you a trading scale that tips the market in the way that you need much more quickly than you can ever do on your own. So I give that to you just as one example, because the result of that is that obviously there is still a large amount of palm oil in the world that is being grown at the price of forests and causing carbon emissions. But there are now far more palm oil sources that are not doing that. And that wouldn't have happened without this kind of level of long-term commitment, understanding of scope, level of ambition and willingness to engage with partners and with collaborators that were normally competitors in a very different way. So I don't know, Anne, if there've been any more questions about that, because that's a really very different business model.
There is a couple of questions that we will address maybe after the call, as it's already 48, so we have to move forward, I'm guessing, but we will address the questions after the call, definitely.
Okay, so let me whiz on then through these. So what have we learnt from that? A lot of mature businesses that are based in Europe and in the States have heavy sourcing from places like Southeast Asia. And it's one of the very common things that you hear when you want to try and drive change through the supply chain is that your sourcing markets just don't understand why we're setting these high standards, because they don't have the regulation that we do. On the other hand, they are increasingly understanding that their biggest customers are facing more and more regulation. Even more crucially, they are your scope 3. So scope 3 means the elements upstream from your supply chain. But they know that sooner or later they will face regulation because these are their issues. So they are going through their own early stages of a change. Increasingly, they're also understanding that if you look at the cost of regulation and you look at the cost of possibly losing customers, doing nothing is going to cost them more than starting to act. And that if you build up a relationship where people are preferred partners, then you can jointly work on cost and risk management in a way that they just couldn't do on their own. So again, in the interests of time, I just want to finish by talking a little bit about the human element of all this, because what I realized across all the work that I'm doing now is that actually it's not the technical barriers that really matter, it's the human characteristic of this. And I talked earlier about our ability, our desire for stability. What does that look like? And human ability to deal with change, because this is change on a completely unprecedented scale. And I just want to refer to these because, again, you will be facing them, and these are what every organisation faces, is that the sales team just don't believe that customers prefer responsible business and brand. And we heard it in the question that you asked there about, well, we have patients, not customers. Somewhere in your supply chain, downstream, there will be other customers who have targets which depend on what you do. So even if you're a business-to-business brand, irrespective of the nature of the end consumer delivery that you have and how clearly branded that is, you actually have the choice of you as a supplier will matter more and more to your customers. So that's absolutely critical. And if your sales teams don't understand what that looks like at the moment, that should be a priority, because that will help drive change. Equally, the teams in the supply chains, and this is universal, all the businesses that I've worked with, just feel that at the front end, the sales teams don't understand their investments. So you have this classic risk of a big matrix with silos, neither of whom really feel like they're appreciated by the other side, when in fact, if you come together and find the common ground, it's really very powerful. And the example I gave you is Unilever, where we injected all the work we'd done through our supply chain into our brands. We talked differently about our brands and more people bought them. Now, I know that sounds like an oversimplification. That was 6 years of very complicated work. But the point is, it starts with those two bits of the organisation getting much closer to each other and understanding where there might be leverage that's positive and thinking about growth, not just cost and risk. And then on top of that, you have everybody's too busy and they're intimidated by it. Well, I go back to what I said at the beginning, if you're not talking about this as part of how you do business, then you simply allow people to put this to one side and you allow it to remain a marginal topic, not a business topic that's talked about in business language. And so the solutions to that start with some very simple things. First of all, it starts by understanding in your sector where there might be opportunity for growth. I don't know where you are as an organisation in exploring that, But every leadership team should have its working hypothesis. It should be driving the requirement for data and insights about that, and looking both at your current customer profile and potentially a future one, and seeing where this offers you an added benefit, either to meet a target a customer may have, or simply to open up new opportunities. Critically, you need to be very clear that there is no such thing as business as usual in the future. It won't exist. So understand that there is a cost to inaction, that will only grow and grow, and in some cases exponentially. Join the bits of your organisation up by identifying much closer internal teams. Think about how you make people feel good about learning new things in sustainability and developing it. And again, we heard in the introduction, you've got ambitious plans. This is going to be unnerving for people. Make heroes of the people who do a good job and who are the pathfinders in that, because everybody will want to be like them. So it's a very powerful, simple mechanism. And have a learning mentality. So like every other change in business, you'll make mistakes. They're very helpful if you treat them in the right way. But really, just to sum up, most fundamentally, what you need to develop as a business, whatever your business is your articulation very simply of why this is both the right thing to do, but essential for your business survival and growth. And that's about where the moral case and the business case come together. It's about people as individuals bringing all of their passion to work, because this connects with their values and their meaning and the contribution they want to have in their work. Crucially, back to my theme, it's about using the science to frame what needs to be done and setting out a path to action that shows how you're going to do that in very concrete, simple terms. And then ultimately bringing all that together so that what you see is a vision of a company that everybody wants to work for, because it is growing, but it's growing in a way that's decoupled from environmental impact and having a fantastic and positive impact on society, which you already do. So when I sum up all the lessons, I think that's my distillation, and I don't know if we've got time for any more questions, Anne, but I hope that's given you some practical pointers about the next stage of your journey.
Thank you very much, Sue. It was very interesting. Yeah, we will definitely follow up with some of the questions that was asked during the call. I don't think unfortunately, we have the time now, but I want to thank you again, and I will just leave the floor to Kirsten, our head of supply and technology solution, to wrap up our today's webcast.
Yeah, thank you, Anne-Laure. And in fact, I'm in my heart the head of sustainability too. So thank you very much. Yeah, so Sue, this was absolutely the right presentation at the right time for us. And I'm so glad to the colleagues who engaged you, because you have been there with Unilever, and everyone, you know, has been from a distance observing the journey. And it's so cool to hear how you have experienced, what you have done, how you messaged it. So there's huge learning for us. And yes, it's different to have a patient compared with a consumer, but patients care. They, of course, need safe and effective medicines, but they also care about the sustainability that we at UCB put into discovering, manufacturing, and commercializing our medicines. So we have a huge opportunity to do the right thing, as you say. We have a huge opportunity to grow our business in a sustainable way that helps the health of the planet, helps the health of people. And yes, we have opportunity on a metrics perspective to really improve what we do currently. We have very strong metrics. We know where we are, but we also have tough goals, and we know we can achieve them. That is really fascinating. And we have people who are engaged. And to the colleagues today, we had 560 people calling in. So you are already the ones that are in it, are convinced, want to learn more, want to do more. So talk to the other people of UCB. What is their job like? How can they contribute? But really, from a leadership perspective, UCB doesn't need to be forced. We have started this journey many years ago, not as long as you have been in it, Sue, but quite a long time. We are well on our way. We are making progress. And this presentation has been fantastic, and we will share it with anybody who has not been here today to also get fired up. So really, thank you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, all colleagues. Thank you, Jacques. Thank you, Anne-Laure, and everyone else who has prepared this event. It's a celebration today of how the world is changing, how all our stakeholders drive us and we drive each other to change for the better. And I'm hugely optimistic hearing today's presentation and the opportunities we have ahead of ourselves. So thank you to all again, and to a greener, more sustainable future for all of us. Thank you.